Y'all can sit here and tell me you didn't watch Hunter Woodhall race and compete at the recent Summer Paris Paralympics and win a matching gold medal with his wife Olympia Woodhall and are just not absolutely emotionally in shambles over just how incredibly inspiring and amazing these athletes are. Hello friends of the internet. Today we are sitting down together and we're going to break down every single Paralympic sport that was in the recent Summer Paris Paralympics. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. My name is Kathy and I'm a 25-year-old competitive figure skater and ex-competitive volleyball player living and training in New York City. You can also find me on Instagram where I also exist and post a lot of my sports athlete life, figure skating, little tidbits on there as well. One of my favorite sayings ever, which I actually don't even know where it originated from, is if there is a will, there is a way. And I truly believe that Paralympic athletes are the embodiment of that spirit. They really challenge the notion of being confined by what others believe the human body is possible and capable of, and I think that's something that everyone can learn from these incredible athletes. With that said, I want to shed light into helping the average Joe like me learn more and have a more educated understanding of what the Paralympics are. These athletes' sports, journeys, and achievements should be spoken about with equal amounts of hype, awareness, and understanding. So super quick, brief crash course of Paralympic history. Sports where athletes with impairments have actually existed over 100 years, but really started to gain more popularity and growth post-World War II to support war veterans and civilians who were injured during the war. In 1944, the British government actually asked Dr. Ludwig Gutmann, I hope I'm saying that right, to open an injuries rehab center at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. And that was really where the idea of rehab sports first came into the picture, which quickly turned into recreational sports and then turned into competitive sport. On July 29th of the 1948 London Olympics, Goodwin organized the first ever competition for athletes in wheelchair, and it was actually archery. And then what became the Stoke Mandeville Games eventually became the start of what is now today the Paralympics. And the first Paralympics ever took place in 1960 in Rome, Italy, with over 400 athletes from 23 different countries. And there were 8 sports that were debuted at the first ever Paralympics, and that was archery, para-swimming, dartchery, snooker, I know, what a name, table tennis, para-athletics, wheelchair fencing, and wheelchair basketball. Similarly to the Olympics, the different types of sporting events that are offered at each Paralympics evolve and change over time. Some sports may be added, some sports may be removed, some sports may have rules that get modified. Today we will be exclusively discussing the sports that were available at the recent Paris Summer Paralympics. Fret not, as a competitive figure skater myself and an avid consumer of both Winter Olympics and Paralympics content, I will be sure to make similar videos come 2026 when the Milan Cortina Winter Olympics and Paralympics roll around. Which, fun fact, I was actually recently in Milan and got to check out some of the construction sites where they're actually starting to build and shape up the Winter Olympics and Paralympic villages. That was super exciting and super cool to kind of see all the buzz starting to kind of bubble up. To understand Paralympic events at a high level, you have to understand the concept of sporting classes. Depending on the athlete's impairment type and how it affects their respective sport, athletes will be grouped differently to make sure the playing field is even. Physical tests and technical tests will be conducted to group athletes into the right sporting classes. There are sporting events offered for 10 impairment types at the Paralympics, and you can group them into 3 larger buckets. I know the corporate girly is really coming out right now, but that is physical impairment, visual impairment, and intellectual impairment. And it's important to note that some sports only cater to a subset of those impairments versus other events like para-athletics actually cater to all types of impairments. Last note before we dive right in, if you guys feel like I have missed something critical or important, or feel like I accidentally misconstrued something, or even just want to talk about a Paralympian that you really love in the comments down below, please do. I took several weeks to do research for this project to hopefully paint as holistic of a picture and as accurate of a picture of all these incredible things that these athletes do. The majority of the resources were derived from the International Paralympics Committee and sources from the Paris Paralympics. And the purpose of me existing on the internet and making these videos to connect with you guys is to have you guys not just, subscribe to the channel, but also subscribe to adding to the dialogue that we need surrounding these important sporting topics. And that's why I do also drop videos every Saturday here on this channel at 9:30 Eastern. So do also subscribe to the channel for more sports and athlete content. Alright, I'll shut up, let's dive in. First sport is para-archery. Para-archery was kind of like the grandfather of it all. It was essentially the first Paralympic sport that was ever created. So depending on the impairment type, the athlete can hold the bow and arrow using straps, release aids, hooks, or even their mouths, which is really freaking impressive. And there are two classes. There's the open class and the W1 class. The open class is for athletes with impairments on the top of their body, the bottom of their body, or one side of their body. And in para archery, there's actually two different bows you can compete with, a recurve bow and a compound bow. And essentially a recurve bow is kind of the traditional bow and arrow. The compound bow actually has pulleys in it, which reduces the tension of the bow. So open class athletes can use either bow, and they can also compete standing, sitting, or in a wheelchair. The W1 class is for athletes with impairment in both the top half and bottom half of their body. Athletes compete with a compound bow only, and they compete in wheelchairs. And one of the most predominant female forces in para archery is China's Chen Mi Yi. I really hope I said that right. My ancestors will definitely be mad at me. I definitely should be pronouncing this name correctly out of all names. Who in DW1 class has won back-to-back golds in both Tokyo and the recent Paris Paralympics. Next sport is para athletics, or if you're in the US, para track and field, I suppose. Para athletics is another one of those OG Paralympic sports that was there from essentially the very beginning, and it is also one of the few events in the Paralympics where athletes with all types of impairment can compete. So groups are determined by a 3-character code beginning with a letter followed by 2 subsequent numbers. The first is the letter that you get, so you either get a T or a F. You get a T if you're a track/jumping athlete, and you get a F if you're a field athlete. And then the first number represents your impairment type, and the second number represents the degree of activity limitation. Some examples of events, which is not comprehensive at all because as we all know, para athletics has so many different events in it. So athletes with vision impairments can run with eye mask on. As you can see here on Paralympia Arjola Didad, this butterfly mask was by far one of the sickest things I ever seen. Like, this look belongs on New York Fashion Week. So athletes with vision impairments often run with a sighted guide, and there are usually linked with like a tether or a rope or some sort of device where they can actually run together. One of my favorite parts of the Paralympics is really seeing the relationships between these Paralympians and their guides, because that bond and trust must be out of this world. To put your whole faith and trust in a gold medal onto someone else who could be your eyes. As a figure skater, I tried pairs for a hot stand. You've probably seen my video. If you haven't, I can link it in the description down below. But just putting your life in the hands of another person is just absolutely crazy. There's also events for athletes with impaired muscle power where you can race in wheelchairs. There's also athletes with lower limb impairments who can compete with prosthetics on both their arms and their legs. In my opinion, one of the coolest events is the mixed gender mixed class 4x100 universal relay. It was actually only recently introduced during the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics, and it's an event where athletes regardless of gender and regardless of abilities come together and work as a team to leverage their strengths. There's a particular order to the race. It's started by a visually impaired athlete, then it's followed by an amputee sprinter, and then the third leg is a person with cerebral palsy, and the finishing leg of the race is a wheelchair athlete. And recently you might have heard of this, but Team USA has captured a bronze in this event with a superstar team that comprised of Corbin Best, Noah Malone, Hunter Woodall, Tatiana McFadden, and Taylor Swanson. Really, really incredible stuff. I can talk about para athletics all day because there's so many events, but we need to get moving. The next sport is para badminton. There's 6 different classes. There's WH1 and WH2, which are wheelchair classes. So the SL3 and the SL4 classes for athletes with lower leg impairments. The SU5 class is for athletes with upper limb impairments, and the SH6 class is for athletes with short stature. So all the wheelchair classes and the SL3 class play full court. So the wheelchair and SL3 athletes play half court in singles and full court for doubles. And in all the wheelchair matches, the area near the net is actually not played because you have to freaking maneuver a wheelchair in between hits. Like, that's just still absolutely crazy to me. Like, I feel like maneuvering a wheelchair is a sport in itself. I literally cannot even run that fast, let alone maneuver a wheelchair to get into perfect position to hit a winning shot in badminton, which is a super, super fast racket sport. And one of the stars in para badminton is Peruvian athlete Pilar Jauregui Cancino. And she actually decided to be a Paralympian after watching the London 2012 Paralympics. And now she is freaking number 2 in the world for women's para badminton in the WH2 class. And that's truly what I believe to be the beauty of the Olympics and the Paralympics, because it makes people see what is the art of the possible of what you can do. So when you're watching, you think, you know, I can try that too, and I can potentially do that too. And I think that is fucking amazing. The next sport is blind football. The name alone is incredibly impressive, and it consists of 4 outfield players and 1 goal player. So all the outfield players are almost or fully blind, and they all wear blackout eye masks. But the goalkeeper is actually the only player who either has full vision or has partial vision. Ball actually has a bell in it, so you can hear when it moves, and when players go for the ball, they typically yell voy to let both the offense and the defense know kind of who's going for what. So in the game, there's essentially 3 sighted players. So there's the goalkeeper that I mentioned just now, there's the coach, and also there is an offensive guide. So the offensive guide can either yell using words, or they can actually bang on the goal post. Fans actually have to be silent until the ball is out of play. And can you imagine football fans being quiet? Like, literally must be like such a hard horse to wrangle. And especially at the recent Paris Paralympics at home, France won a really tight game against Argentina, and that of course was an incredible feat. And the next sport we're going to dive into is bocce. And bocce is one of the 2 sports offered at the Paris Paralympics that does not have an Olympic counterpart. Bocce was originally developed for athletes with coordination impairments, but has now adapted and grown to accommodate athletes with different types of impairments. The premise of the game is that there's 2 sides that compete against each other, and you can either compete in singles, which is 1-on-1s, doubles, which is 2-on-2, or triples, which is obviously 3-on-3s. So one side gets 6 red balls and one side gets 6 blue balls. No puns intended. The goal and how you win the game is to get your ball closest to the white ball that is called the jack. Essentially, as you play, you can knock other players' balls to gain a certain advantage, so this game is actually a lot more strategic than you think it is. From someone who personally can't even play pool or can't play golf, I feel like this sport just looks absolutely insane, and I can't even imagine attempting it. So there's 4 classes, and all 4 classes compete in wheelchairs. BC1 athletes require an assistant to help maneuver the wheelchair, and they play the game using their hands or their feet. BC2 athletes can throw without assistance. BC3 athletes have significant impairments in the limbs or the trunk, so they can use a ramp, a pointer, or a ramp operator to play the ball. And here's the coolest part: if they win a medal, the ramp operator also wins a medal at the Paralympics. So a dominant force in this sport is actually Adam Peska, who is a Czech athlete, and he competes in the BC3 category, and he plays with a ramp operator. And growing up his whole life, his mom has actually been his ramp operator, and I'm just like, that is the sweetest, most incredible duo. And to top it all off, him and his mom both got a gold medal at the last Tokyo 2020 Paralympics. And the next sport is paracanoe. So there's actually 2 boat types you can compete with. There's kayak and there's something called a va. And the kayak is slightly more faster paced discipline. A va actually has an outrigger attached to one side of the boat, and that is to help the boat balance. The sports classes here depend on which boat you race in. If you're a KL1 athlete, you propel using only your arms. If you're a KL2 or a VL2 athlete, you have partial trunk and leg muscles to help propel your strokes forward. If you're a KL3 or a VL3 athlete, you have full functioning in your trunk and your arms, but you have partial functioning in the leg. And one of the coolest stories in paracanoe is India's power duo and power couple. Manish Korev and Prachi Yadav are a husband-wife duo who both won medals at the recent 2022 Para Asian Games in Hangzhou. And just talk about being a freaking power couple. And the next sport is paracycling, and there's 2 disciplines, and that is road and track. So for the road discipline, you can compete using a bicycle, a hand cycle, a tricycle, or a tandem. In the track discipline, you can compete using a bicycle or a tandem. There's 5 classes, C1 to C5, for standard biking. The number here represents the degree of impairment, and there's also 5 classes for hand cycling, H1 through H5, and then there's 2 additional classes for tricycle for athletes with impairments in coordination and balance, and then the tandem is for athletes with vision impairment who ride with a sighted pilot in front of them. And one of the most incredible stories here is the story of Sarah Story. I literally did not plan for that. Captured 3 gold medals at the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics. And with 30 Paralympic medals, she is Britain's most decorated Paralympian, and she's also married to her tandem pilot, which I think is so fucking cute. I swear to God, there's always so much love and just joy in the Olympics and the Paralympics. This is what I love. para-equestrian. If you watch my tier ranking every single Olympic sport video that I also have on my channel, I'll also link it in the description down below. I talked about equestrian. In Olympics, there are 3 disciplines. There's dressage, there's jumping, and there's eventing. But in the Paralympic counterpart of para-equestrian, there is actually only the dressage event. And another fun fact, para-equestrian is actually the only artistic event in the entire Paralympic Games. Para-equestrian and para-dressage, you essentially make the horse kind of like move and dance to music depending on just slight shifts in your weight. You're basically just like a horse whisperer. Like, the idea of dressage and para-dressage still blows my mind. So athletes here sometimes compete with an adapted saddle or sometimes use their voice to kind of further communicate better with the horse. And here the classes are called grades, and there's 5 grades depending on the level of impairment. And do note here that a single grade covers all impairment types and all genders. And one of the most awesome athletes in this space is 4 times Paralympian. Okay, I need a deep breath before I say this name. Katja Karolinianen, who is now in her 60s and has a career that spanned over 20 years. Literally, Queen is out here proving that age is just a number, which is another model of this channel if you watch my other videos. The next sport is goalball, and it is the other sport other than bocce that is exclusive to the Paralympics. So goalball is only for athletes with vision impairments to all sorts of degrees, and they all wear blackout eye masks when they compete. It's a 6v6 game with 3 members of the team playing at each time on each side. Similarly to blind football, the ball that they play with has a bell in it so athletes can better understand where the positioning of the ball is, and also the court lines are a little bit raised so you can also feel where you are. The athletes can maneuver the ball by bouncing it or spinning it, and there's a goal on each end that's defended by a goalie, and you actually defend using your body. And if the ball is blocked, you essentially have 10 seconds to return to attack. One of the leaders in this space is Turkey's Sevda Altunoluk, and she made history in Paris as the only female goalball player to ever win 3 gold medals. Queen is slaying left to right, what can I say? Next sport is para-judo, and it's also for athletes with vision impairment. It follows the same rules as its Olympic counterpart, and there's 2 classes, J1 and J2. J1 athletes are either completely blind or have very limited vision, and they actually wear a red circle on their back called a judogi, and that indicates that the athlete may need support before, during, or after a match. And athletes in the J2 class have acute vision impairments. Chinese judoka Shi Yijie recently won gold at her debut at the Paris Paralympics. And she came out in an interview saying that when she went completely blind when she was about 12 years old, it felt really isolating and she felt really insecure. But once she found judo, she found like an incredible community of people who believed in her and just made her feel like a human. And I think that is the beauty and the power of sports in giving people purpose, and that's just, again, why I love everything about the Paralympics. Para-powerlifting, you compete using a bench press. And here there is only 1 sport class. You're just kind of categorized by gender and also by weight class. And this sport is for athletes with lower limb or hip impairments. So when the athlete does the lift is actually judged by 3 judges who have a set of lights that they can turn either white or red, and an athlete needs at least 2 white lights to consider the lift as a good lift. And a predominant athlete here is Emmanuel Oku, who represents Ghana, and he actually started his para-powerlifting journey after watching the Rio Paralympic, just like seeing what is the art of the possible, and then he started doing it, and flash forward now, he is a Paralympian himself, which again, incredible stuff. Then we have para-rowing, 3 classes, PR1 to PR3. So the PR1 class is for athletes without any leg or trunk function. They compete with 2 oars strapped to their bodies for balance purposes. PR2 and PR3 athletes have various levels of leg functionality to kind of help generate more power from their lower body as well. So there are 3 events. There's single sculls, there's double sculls, and there's also coxed fours. So the single sculls event is for PR1 athletes. The double sculls events are for PR2 and PR3 athletes. And the coxed four includes 3 rowers and a coxswain, and it comprises of 2 men and 2 women of all different impairment types. And the coxswain position is 1 athlete who could be able-bodied, and 2 athletes on the rise are French para-rowing duo Alberti and Cadeau, and they recently won gold in the 2023 World Rowing Championships just after only partnering for 2 years. That must be some chemistry. And the next sport is called the shooting parasport, where you either shoot a rifle or a pistol at varying distances. So you can shoot kneeling, standing, in a wheelchair, or in what's called the prone position, which if you ever watched a spy film before, it's always like what that sniper looking person is doing on a rooftop. And there's 2 classes here. SH1 is for athletes with impairments in the upper body and or lower body. There are pistol events and rifle events. In the pistol event, you shoot with one arm unsupported, and for the rifle event, you support the rifle with your upper limb. The SH2 class only has a rifle event, and they use a shooting stand to support the rifle. And one of the incredible athlete stories here is of Avani Lakhara. She became the first Indian female athlete to win a gold medal at the Paralympic Games at only 19. I don't know what the hell I was doing when I was 19, but it was certainly not winning gold medals. And next sport is sitting volleyball, and it is 6-on-6, just like its Olympic counterpart. The net is lower and the court is smaller. You move by pushing or sliding around using your hands and your feet. Every time you make contact with the ball, a part of your body between your butt and your shoulders must touch the ground. Also, crazy rule, blocking a serve is permitted, and not gonna lie, kind of OP. And the classes here are VS1 and VS2, depending on the level of impairment. You may ask, if the degree of limitation is based on classes, how do team sports then work in the Paralympics? So teams can have up to 2 VS2 athletes, but only one of them can be playing on a court at any given time. An amazing athlete story here is of Canadian Paralympian Heidi Peters, who is an absolute force in sitting volleyball, and she actually grew up playing standing volleyball, but when she was young, she actually got diagnosed with bone cancer, and she thought she would never play again. But eventually she was able to find out about sitting volleyball, and I think that must have just given her such a restoration and just purpose and fulfillment, because now girlie is 3-time Paralympian and just is living her best life, and we love that. Next sport is para swimming, and it's another one of those OG Paralympic sports, and it's inclusive of all different styles of swimming and distances. Athletes compete in the same Olympic-sized pools, but it only has 8 lanes instead of 10. S represents freestyle, backstroke, and butterfly. SB stands for breaststroke, and SM stands for medley. So there are 10 numerical classes. The lower the number, the greater degree of impairment, and in para swimming, no prostheses are allowed. There's also 3 additional vision classes, S11 through S13, and they all wear blackout goggles. And then here's also the really cool part. They also have someone called a tapper who literally uses something called like a bunker, I think, or like a pole to tap them to let them know when they're supposed to turn. Because that was like my biggest question, is like, how would you know when is a good time to turn? Because these swimmers swim so freaking fast. So that is how they do it. Super creative and super awesome. And there's also a class called S14 for intellectual impairments. I believe in the sport of para swimming outside the Paralympics, there's also other classes, but the Paris Paralympic did not list them, so I'm assuming that certain classes weren't offered at the Paralympics. There's also different starting methods. You can either start in the water with some sort of starting device, you can also hold onto a rope with your mouth, or you can dive in. In Paris recently, Japanese athlete Takayuki Suzuki, who is a 10-time Paralympic medalist, captured another 4 medals, 1 gold, 2 silver, and 1 bronze. He essentially said that in an interview after competing at the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics, there were a lot more Japanese fans that knew about the Paralympics, support the Paralympics, and his hope is that more people out there will tune into the Paralympic Games year after year. So with that message said, go watch the Paralympics, guys. Para table tennis was another one of those OG Paralympic sports. It has 11 different sport classes depending on the degree of impairment and activity limitation. Whether or not you competed in a wheelchair or standing depended on your class. There's been numerous creative tactics that have been adopted by athletes to play in para table tennis, and one of the dominant players in this sport is Australian athlete Lee Na Lei, who won a gold medal and another impressive bronze medal for Australia in the Paris Paralympics. I think counter to Ray Gunn, she did Australia quite proud. And the next sport is para taekwondo. Athletes here wear protective equipment and also something called sensor socks, so they can register whenever a hit was given to the torso. I feel like I'm really bad at describing contact sports. So points in in para taekwondo are essentially rewarded by the type of kicks and hits that you land onto your opponent's torso. So at Paris 2024, para taekwondo will feature the K44 sport class, which includes athletes with impairments with either one or both upper limbs. If I'm not mistaken, there are actually other classes of para taekwondo athletes, but the only one that the Paris Paralympics seemed to be offering was the K44. An incredible athlete in this space is Peru's Angelica Espinoza, and she helped her country win their first Paralympic medal since the 2004 Athens game and proceeded to help them win their first gold medal since the 2000 Sydney Paralympics. So the next sport is para triathlon, and it has 3 segments: swimming, cycling, and running. Athletes compete in different sports classes depending on the degree of activity limitation to each portion of their race. So for the seated races, athletes use a hand cycle in the cycling portion of their race, and they use a wheelchair for the running portion of their race. In standing events, athletes can modify their bikes, or they can use assistive equipment such as prosthetics. In the vision impairment events, athletes are assisted by a guide throughout the entire competition. In the cycling section, they ride with them in tandem. And then in the swimming and running sections, the guide and the athlete are tethered together. And an incredible story here is US Paralympian Grace Norman, who captured the event's very first female gold medal at only 18 years old, and she just repeated that recently at the Paris Paralympics. And the next sport we have is wheelchair basketball, and it's a 5-on-5 sport. The court, the hoop, and the backboard are all the same as its Olympic counterpart. There is one key difference in rule. Wheelchair athletes must either bounce or pass the ball for every 2 pushes they use with their wheelchair to not be counted as traveling. Teams are made up of athletes from a variety of different sport classes. Sport classes here are defined in a point value system in a scale from 1 through 4.5 points. The higher the point score, the lower the limitation. So teams can only have up to 14 points among the 5 players that they have on the court. You may also ask, how do these athletes move so impressively fast and with so much agility? 1, they're just hella fucking skilled at maneuvering the wheelchair. And 2, these wheelchairs are actually designed very, very differently. Usually the ones that wheelchair basketball players use includes the inclusion of caster wheeled and cambered wheels. And an incredible athlete in this space is Steve Serio, who represents Team USA at the recent Paris Paralympics and helped the team bring home the gold. He suffered from a spinal tumor when he was just 11 months old, which left him paralyzed, but later on in life, he decided to pick up wheelchair basketball, and here he is now a Paralympic gold medalist. So the next sport is wheelchair fencing. There's 3 disciplines based on the weapon and also what the attack zone is. You have epee and saber, which the attack zone is all above the waist, and foil, where the attack zone is the torso. Here, the wheelchairs are fixed, and athletes actually cannot stand up or move from their wheelchair in a bout. You might ask, between the 2 fencers, how do you decide how far apart they are or how far to place the wheelchairs? And that is decided by the arm's length distance of the shorter fencer, or the person or the fencer with the shorter arm span, wingspan. I don't know. You know what I mean. Category A athletes have good sitting balance, but they have impairments in the lower limbs. Category B athletes either have impairments in the lower limbs that affects their sitting balance and potentially impairments that affect their fencing limb. Hong Kong fencer Yu Tui was a dominant force in the sport as a 7-time wheelchair fencing champion. Absolutely nuts. And the next one we have is wheelchair rugby, and I'm going to tell you right off the bat, wheelchair rugby is as much of a contact sport as its Olympic counterpart. Wheelchair rugby includes elements of rugby, handball, and basketball. And the team that scores the most amount of tries is the team that wins. And a try is scored when a player with the ball crosses the try line with both reels of the wheelchair. And what's unique about wheelchair rugby is it's actually a mixed sport. So like its Olympic counterpart, hitting and blocking is allowed. And similarly to wheelchair basketball, the sport classes here are based on a point system from 0.5 to 3.5. The total point value of the 4 players on the court at all time cannot exceed 8 points. The minor exception here is an additional half point is allowed for every female player that's on the team. So there's actually a difference in equipment. Defensive players actually use a wheelchair with like a longer bumper to hold opponents or to strike opponents, and attacking players actually have different wheelchairs that are used to maximize speed and agility. And one of the dominant players here is Team USA's Chuck Aoki, and with 4 Paralympic medals, 3 silver, 1 bronze, he is the most decorated wheelchair rugby athlete in the US. And lastly, we have wheelchair tennis, which is played on the same court, the same rules, and the same equipment as its Olympic counterpart. There is one key difference in the game, and that is the ball is allowed to be bounced twice. And only the first bounce needs to be within the court limits. So there's two classes, there's the open division and the quad division. The open division is for athletes who have impairment in one or both lower limbs, but don't have any impairments in their upper limbs. And the quad division is for athletes with impairments in both their upper limbs and lower limbs. And one of the craziest athletes that I have ever heard of is Dylan Alcott. And if you think competing in one Paralympic sport is crazy enough, this guy competes in two and has medals in two. He competes in both wheelchair basketball and wheelchair tennis. Some people are just built different. Alrighty, that was a lot of me yapping, but I think it's sometimes important to yap about these kind of things. At the end of the day, Paralympic athletes are not athletes you need to pity or athletes you need to feel sorry about, are athletes that you should feel inspired by, be motivated by, be encouraged by, to challenge the boundaries of what your own body can do. Is just an absolutely amazing and inspiring feat. If you like more sports related content or videos like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. It will literally take you 1 second and I will love you 3,000. New videos will be on this channel every Saturday at 9:30 Eastern, so leave me a comment down below on what you would like to see from me next, and your next idea may just be the next video that I make. Alright, till next time, bye guys. Sports for athletes with impairments have actually Sports for athletes.
Boy, your honey sickly sweet keeps me coming, got me